It started like any other peaceful evening inside the grand mansion. The sun was setting behind tall glass windows, casting a golden glow across the marble floors. The billionaire's wife had just finished a charity phone call and was walking slowly toward the staircase. She looked elegant as always, calm and confident, but something felt slightly off. A housemaid passing by noticed that she paused for a moment, holding the railing a little tighter than usual. Her breathing seemed heavier, but no one thought much of it. She had been busy for weeks with events and social gatherings. Everyone assumed she was simply tired. Then it happened. Without warning, her hand slipped from the railing, her body swayed, and she collapsed onto the polished floor. The sound echoed through the large hallway. A crystal vase shattered beside her as it fell from a nearby table. For a few seconds, everything was silent. Then panic exploded inside the mansion. Staff members rushed toward her, calling her name again and again. Her eyes were closed, her skin looked pale, and her breathing was shallow and uneven. One of the maids quickly called emergency services while another tried to gently wake her, but she did not respond. The billionaire was in his private office when he heard the screaming. He ran faster than he had ever run before. His heart pounded loudly in his chest as he saw his wife lying motionless on the floor. He dropped to his knees beside her, holding her hand tightly, whispering her name with fear in his voice. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air outside the mansion. Paramedics rushed in with medical equipment, speaking quickly and calmly as they checked her pulse, oxygen levels, and heart rate. The staff stepped back, watching with worried faces. "She's critical," one paramedic said quietly. They placed an oxygen mask over her face and carefully lifted her onto a stretcher. The billionaire followed closely behind as they moved quickly toward the ambulance. His hands were shaking, and his mind was filled with terrifying thoughts. The ride to the hospital felt endless. Even though the sirens were loud and the vehicle was moving fast, time seemed to slow down for him. He kept staring at the heart monitor, watching the unstable rhythm appear on the small screen. Every beat made him more anxious. At the hospital, a team of doctors and nurses were already waiting. The billionaire had influence, and the hospital knew who he was. They immediately transferred her into the emergency room, where bright lights and urgent voices surrounded her. Doctors began running tests right away. Blood samples were taken, scans were ordered, machines were connected to monitor her heart, brain activity, and breathing. The room was filled with serious faces and focused energy. Outside the emergency room, the billionaire paced back and forth. His expensive suit was now wrinkled, and his confident posture had disappeared. For the first time in years, he looked helpless. Money, power, and status meant nothing in this moment. After what felt like hours, a senior doctor finally walked out to speak with him. The doctor's expression was professional but concerned. "She is stable for now," the doctor explained carefully, "but we still don't know what caused the collapse." The words hit him hard. "What do you mean you don't know?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. "Run every test possible, bring the best specialists, do whatever it takes." The doctor nodded, assuring him that they were doing everything they could. As the night continued, more specialists arrived. Cardiologists checked her heart, neurologists studied her brain scans, toxicologists examined her blood for any signs of poisoning or unusual substances. Every possible cause was considered, but nothing clear appeared. Inside the intensive care unit, she remained unconscious. Machines breathed gently for her, and monitors displayed numbers that doctors studied closely. Nurses adjusted medications carefully, watching for any small change. Back at the mansion, the atmosphere had completely changed. The once lively home felt empty and cold. Staff members spoke in whispers. Fear and uncertainty filled every room. News of her sudden hospitalization began spreading quietly among close friends and business partners. Rumors started to form. Was it stress? Was it a hidden illness? Was it something more serious? The billionaire refused to leave the hospital. He sat beside her bed, holding her hand, remembering their life together. He thought about their travels, their shared dreams, and the laughter they had just days before. It was hard to believe that everything had changed in a single moment. Doctors continued their investigation through the night. Each new test result brought the same frustrating answer: nothing unusual, nothing clear, nothing that explained why a healthy, active woman had suddenly collapsed. As morning light slowly entered the hospital windows, exhaustion showed on every doctor's face. They were some of the best medical professionals in the country, yet they had no diagnosis. And that was the most frightening part of all. Because when doctors do not know what is wrong, they do not know how to fix it. The billionaire looked at his wife lying still in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines and wires, and for the first time in his powerful life, he felt completely powerless. The emergency had passed, but a much bigger mystery had just begun. By the third day, the hospital no longer felt like a place of healing, it felt like a battlefield where everyone was slowly losing. The billionaire stood in front of the wide glass window of the private VIP wing, staring down at the city he once controlled with confidence. From the top floor, he could see his company towers, busy highways, and flashing billboards carrying his name. Usually, that view filled him with pride, but now it only reminded him of one painful truth: none of it could help the woman lying unconscious behind him. Inside the intensive care room, machines continued their steady rhythm, beep, beep, beep. The sound had become the soundtrack of his fear. His wife had not opened her eyes, her breathing was still supported by oxygen, her body looked peaceful, but the doctors knew peace was an illusion. That morning, a group of top specialists gathered in the conference room: cardiologists, neurologists, internal medicine experts, and even rare disease consultants sat around a long table covered with medical reports. Brain scans were projected onto a large screen, blood test results were highlighted in red, every number had been examined again and again. "There is no stroke," one doctor said firmly. "No sign of infection," another added. "Her heart is strong," said the cardiologist, shaking his head. Every possible explanation was being eliminated, but no real answer was found. The billionaire entered the room without knocking, his presence immediately silenced everyone. He looked tired, his eyes were red from lack of sleep, but his voice was steady. "I don't want possibilities," he said, "I want answers." The head doctor spoke carefully, choosing each word with caution. "We are doing everything medical science allows. We have run advanced imaging tests, toxicology screenings, neurological mapping, even genetic markers show nothing unusual." Nothing unusual. Those words felt like an insult. How could this situation be nothing unusual? His healthy, vibrant wife was fighting for her life. "Bring in more experts," he demanded, "international specialists, experimental treatments, I will pay whatever it costs." And he meant it. By the end of the day, phone calls had been made across continents. A renowned neurologist from Europe agreed to review the scans remotely. A rare disease expert from the United States joined through video conference. The hospital staff moved faster than ever before, because when a billionaire makes a request, the world listens. But medicine does not always listen to money. New tests were ordered, some were so advanced they were rarely used. Her body was carefully examined again, tiny details were measured and recorded, yet each result returned with the same frustrating conclusion: stable but unexplained. Outside the hospital, news had started to spread, reporters gathered near the entrance, cameras waited for updates, social media was filled with speculation, some people showed sympathy, others created wild theories. The billionaire's empire had always attracted attention, and now his personal tragedy was becoming public entertainment. Inside the hospital room, however, none of that mattered. He sat beside her bed again that night, holding her cold hand between both of his. He spoke softly, telling her about their first vacation together, about the day he proposed, about how she had always believed in him even before he became powerful. "You have to fight," he whispered, "you are stronger than this." For a brief second, he thought he saw her fingers move, his heart jumped with hope, but it was only a reflex. The nurse gently adjusted the monitor and gave him a sympathetic look. Hope was becoming fragile. On the fourth day, the doctors admitted something they hated to admit. "We are running out of diagnostic directions," the head physician said privately. It was not a sentence doctors liked to say, it meant science had reached its limits, at least for now. The billionaire felt anger rising inside him, not at the doctors, but at the situation. He had built his life solving impossible problems, he had saved failing companies, closed billion-dollar deals overnight, turned risks into success stories, but this problem would not respond to strategy or negotiation. This was different. This was personal. He looked through the glass wall at the team of experts working tirelessly around her bed, adjusting medication levels, checking monitors, reviewing charts. They were not careless, they were not incompetent, they were simply confused. And confusion in medicine can be dangerous. The most painful part was that her condition was not dramatically worsening, but it was not improving either. She was trapped in a silent space between danger and recovery, and no one knew which direction she would go. Late that evening, as another specialist quietly left the hospital shaking his head, the billionaire realized something he had never experienced before. Money could buy the best equipment, the best doctors, the best private rooms, but it could not guarantee a solution. For the first time in his powerful life, he felt small. And while the world outside continued moving at full speed, inside that hospital room, time felt frozen. The battle was no longer about wealth or influence. It was about finding one tiny missing piece in a puzzle that the greatest minds had failed to solve. While the doctors searched through medical charts and advanced reports, someone else was quietly searching through memories. Her name was Angela, and most people in the mansion barely noticed her. She had worked there for 5 years, moving silently through the halls, polishing marble floors, dusting expensive artwork, and keeping the enormous house spotless. She wore simple uniforms, tied her hair neatly back, and kept her eyes lowered whenever the wealthy guests passed by. But Angela noticed everything. She noticed which flowers the billionaire's wife preferred in the dining room. She noticed when the kitchen staff slightly changed a recipe. She noticed when the air inside the house felt different, heavy, dry, unusual. Since the collapse, the mansion felt empty. The laughter that once echoed through the tall ceilings was gone. Staff members whispered instead of speaking normally. Everyone feared losing their jobs if tragedy struck permanently. Angela feared something else. She feared that something important had been ignored. On the morning of the collapse, she had been cleaning the upstairs hallway. She remembered hearing slow footsteps near the staircase. She had looked up briefly and saw her employer holding the railing, pausing as if dizzy. At the time, Angela assumed it was simple exhaustion. Wealthy people often pushed themselves too hard with events and travel. But now, small details began replaying in her mind like pieces of a puzzle. She remembered that 2 weeks earlier, new scented candles had been placed in the master bedroom, imported and expensive. The billionaire's wife had mentioned they were part of a luxury collection. After that, Angela noticed the room often felt stuffy when the windows were closed. The air conditioning system had also been serviced recently. She had overheard maintenance workers discussing a minor ventilation issue. At the time, it seemed unimportant. Now it felt different. Angela sat alone in the staff kitchen during her short break, stirring her tea absent-mindedly. Her thoughts were louder than the ticking wall clock. She was not a doctor, she had no medical education, but she had grown up caring for her grandmother, who suffered from breathing problems. She remembered how certain smells and poor air circulation made her grandmother weak and dizzy. What if something in the mansion had slowly affected her employer? The idea sounded foolish, even disrespectful. How could she question a team of elite doctors? They had machines worth millions, degrees from famous universities, years of training. She was just a maid. Still, her heart would not let the thought go. That afternoon, she asked one of the housekeepers quietly, "Did you ever feel strange in the master bedroom lately?" The housekeeper hesitated, then shrugged. "Sometimes it smells too strong in there, but I thought it was those new candles." Angela's pulse quickened slightly. That was not proof, but it was something. She continued thinking carefully, trying to remember every unusual detail from the past month. She recalled that the billionaire's wife had complained once about mild headaches. She had joked about feeling tired even after long sleep. No one had taken it seriously. Stress was common in their lifestyle. Angela stood up suddenly, her chair scraping softly against the floor. What if it wasn't stress? That evening, she gathered courage and asked the head house manager about the air system repairs. The manager seemed annoyed. "That's none of your concern," he replied quickly, "focus on your duties." His reaction made her doubt herself again. Maybe she was imagining connections that did not exist. Meanwhile, at the hospital, doctors continued to search inside the body for answers. But what if the answer was not inside the body alone? What if it was something surrounding her every day, something invisible? Angela could not sleep that night. She kept thinking about the morning sunlight entering the bedroom windows, the heavy scent in the air, the slight dizziness she once noticed in her employer's step. The more she thought, the stronger her feeling became. By the next day, she made a quiet decision. She would go to the hospital, not as a servant delivering clothes or personal items, but as someone who might have seen something important. Her hands trembled as she entered the hospital lobby. It was filled with security, reporters outside, and serious-looking staff members. She felt small in her simple clothes among expensive suits and flashing cameras. She almost turned back. But then she remembered the kind smile her employer had once given her on her birthday, the way she had thanked her personally for decorating the dining hall so beautifully. That memory gave her strength. Angela approached the reception desk softly and asked if she could speak to a nurse about something she had noticed. The receptionist looked confused but directed her to a waiting area. As she sat there, heart racing, she wondered if anyone would take her seriously, or if they would simply see her uniform and dismiss her words before hearing them. Upstairs, the billionaire was once again being told that doctors still had no clear cause. And downstairs, in a quiet hospital chair, the most overlooked person in the entire story was preparing to speak up. She did not know if her observation would matter. But deep inside, she felt certain of one thing. Sometimes the smallest detail can save a life. Angela had always believed that small things mattered. Not the loud things people bragged about, not the expensive things locked inside glass cabinets, but the quiet, almost invisible details that most people ignored. And now, sitting in the hospital waiting area with her hands tightly folded in her lap, she felt those small details pressing against her mind like a warning bell that refused to stop ringing. She closed her eyes and replayed the weeks before the collapse, not just the big moments, but the tiny ones, the kind only someone who cleans a room every day would notice. The master bedroom had changed recently, not dramatically, but subtly. A new automatic fragrance system had been installed along with the imported candles. The billionaire's wife had loved pleasant scents. She once laughed and said the room should smell like a luxury hotel at all times. At first, the scent was soft and elegant, but after a few days, Angela noticed it grew stronger, especially at night when the windows were shut and the air conditioning ran continuously. The room sometimes felt heavier than the rest of the house. One evening, while changing the bed sheets, Angela remembered feeling slightly dizzy herself. She had stepped into the hallway for fresh air and blamed it on skipping lunch. She never thought about it again. Until now. Another memory surfaced. 2 weeks before the collapse, the billionaire's wife had asked for a glass of water in the middle of the night, something she rarely did. She had complained about waking up with headaches, pressing her fingers gently against her temples. Probably stress, she had said with a small smile. But Angela now wondered if it was more than stress. At the hospital, she finally gathered the courage to approach a young nurse standing near the reception desk. Her voice was soft but steady. "I think something in the house may have made her sick," Angela said carefully. The nurse looked surprised. "What do you mean?" Angela explained about the fragrance system, the strong scent, the dizziness, the ventilation repairs that were mentioned weeks ago. She spoke slowly, afraid of sounding foolish. The nurse listened politely but did not look convinced. "The doctors have already tested for toxins and chemicals in her blood," she replied gently. There was nothing unusual. Angela felt her confidence shrinking. Maybe she truly was overthinking. But just as she was about to apologize and leave, a familiar voice interrupted them. "What did you just say?" The billionaire had been walking past the reception area when he overheard part of the conversation. His eyes looked tired, but there was sharp focus in them now. Angela froze for a second. She had never spoken to him directly beyond simple greetings. I noticed changes in the bedroom air," she said nervously. "The scent system, the ventilation repair, sometimes the room felt difficult to breathe in." The billionaire stared at her, not with anger, but with deep concentration. He remembered the new installations. He remembered approving the maintenance work without much thought. He turned immediately to the nurse. "Have the doctors checked environmental exposure from the house itself?" The nurse hesitated. Standard toxicology was done. "Standard is not enough," he replied firmly. Within an hour, the hospital's medical team was informed about the possible environmental factor. It was not that they had ignored the idea completely, but their focus had been on internal medical causes, not prolonged low-level exposure to something subtle inside the home. A specialist in environmental medicine was contacted urgently. Detailed questions were asked about the mansion's air system, the fragrance chemicals, recent repairs, and any potential carbon monoxide leaks or chemical imbalances. Meanwhile, technicians were sent to inspect the house immediately. Angela waited quietly in the hallway, feeling both hopeful and terrified. What if she was wrong? What if she had wasted precious time? Late that evening, a phone call came from the inspection team at the mansion. There was a problem. The new automated fragrance system had been improperly installed. Combined with a minor ventilation malfunction in the master bedroom, it had created an enclosed space where chemical levels slowly built up over time, not high enough to cause immediate poisoning, but enough to trigger prolonged oxygen imbalance and neurological stress, especially during long nights with windows closed. The condition was rare and difficult to detect in early blood tests because the exposure was gradual and inconsistent. When the environmental specialist heard this, he immediately recommended specific oxygen therapy adjustments and detoxification protocols tailored to chemical inhalation exposure. Inside the ICU, treatment was modified carefully. Doctors monitored her response closely, adjusting medications and oxygen levels with new understanding. The billionaire stood outside the room again, staring through the glass wall, but this time, something felt different. For the first time in days, there was a clear direction. And down the hallway, Angela sat silently in a chair, exhausted but steady. She did not feel proud, she did not feel heroic. She only felt relieved that someone had finally listened. Because sometimes the biggest mysteries are solved not by the most powerful people in the room, but by the quiet observer who notices what everyone else walks past. The moment the doctors adjusted the treatment plan, the entire atmosphere inside the ICU shifted. It was no longer blind guessing, it was focused action. Clear tubes delivered controlled oxygen at carefully measured levels. New medications were introduced to help her body flush out chemical traces. Nurses monitored her blood saturation every few minutes instead of every hour. The room felt tense but purposeful, like a team finally moving in the right direction after days of walking in circles. The billionaire did not leave her side, not even when his phone vibrated non-stop with calls from board members and media representatives. For the first time in years, billion-dollar decisions felt unimportant. The only decision that mattered was happening inside that hospital room. Angela remained in the background, sitting quietly near the waiting area. She had offered her observation, and now events were unfolding far beyond her understanding. She watched doctors walk past quickly, speaking in serious tones, carrying files and tablets filled with data. Every time a nurse came out of the ICU, Angela's heart jumped slightly. She searched their faces for signs, good news or bad, hope or disappointment. Hours passed slowly. Inside the room, something small but important began to happen. Her oxygen levels, which had been unstable for days, started to improve gradually. The numbers on the monitor climbed carefully upward, not dramatically, but steadily. One of the nurses noticed it first. She called the attending physician quietly. They reviewed the data together, comparing it with earlier readings. "It's not random," the doctor said softly, "her body is responding." By evening, her breathing became slightly stronger on its own. The machine support was reduced just a little. The change was small, but in critical care, small changes mean everything. The billionaire was informed immediately. "She's showing positive signs," the doctor explained, keeping his voice calm but hopeful. "It's too early to celebrate, but this is the first clear improvement we've seen." For a moment, the billionaire closed his eyes. Relief washed over his face like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He did not smile fully, but his shoulders relaxed for the first time in days. "Continue whatever you're doing," he said firmly. Meanwhile, technicians at the mansion continued their investigation. The faulty ventilation unit in the master bedroom was dismantled. Chemical residue levels were measured carefully. Reports confirmed that prolonged exposure in that enclosed space could cause dizziness, headaches, confusion, and eventually collapse in sensitive individuals. It was rare, subtle, easy to miss. And that was exactly why it had been missed. Back at the hospital, the night felt different from the previous ones. The beeping machines no longer sounded like warning alarms, they sounded like steady progress. Nurses moved with cautious optimism, doctors reviewed charts with focused attention instead of confusion. Angela remained seated quietly until very late, unsure if she should leave or stay. She did not expect recognition, she did not even expect to be remembered in this situation. But as she stood up to finally go home, a voice stopped her. Angela. She turned, surprised that the billionaire knew her name. He walked toward her slowly, his expression was serious but softer than she had ever seen before. The doctors told me about the ventilation issue, he said. They said your observation led them to re-examine environmental exposure. Angela lowered her eyes respectfully. I only shared what I noticed, sir. He studied her face carefully, as if seeing her clearly for the first time, not just as a staff member moving silently through his home, but as a person who had paid attention when others had not. You may have saved her life, he said quietly. Angela felt her throat tighten. She had not allowed herself to think that far. I just didn't want anything to be overlooked, she replied softly. Upstairs in the ICU, something even more powerful happened during the early hours of the morning. Her fingers moved intentionally, not a random reflex this time. A nurse noticed and leaned closer. Ma'am, can you hear me? The nurse asked gently. Her eyelids fluttered slightly, weak, but deliberate. The nurse immediately called the doctor. The room filled with controlled urgency again, but this time it was hopeful urgency. The billionaire was rushed inside. He stood beside her bed as her eyes slowly opened halfway, unfocused but alive with awareness. He held her hand carefully. You're safe, he whispered, his voice trembling. Tears formed in his eyes, but he did not look away. Her recovery was not complete, not immediate, but she was coming back, step by fragile step. And down the hallway, Angela stood still as a nurse shared the news with her quietly. She opened her eyes. Angela placed her hand over her mouth, overcome with emotion she had been holding back for days. She did not feel like a hero, she felt grateful, grateful that she had spoken up, grateful that someone had listened, grateful that a small detail had not remained buried in silence. Inside the hospital, the battle was not fully won, but hope had finally returned. And sometimes, hope is the strongest medicine of all. The breakthrough changed everything, but it did not come with fanfare or celebration. Inside the mansion, the technicians continued testing every inch of the master bedroom, measuring airflow, chemical residues, and ventilation efficiency. Their report confirmed what Angela had suspected all along. The combination of the new fragrance system and the improperly functioning air vents had created a nearly invisible hazard. Slowly, chemicals had accumulated in the enclosed space, producing low-level toxicity that affected the billionaire's wife over days, until one night, her body could no longer cope, resulting in her sudden collapse. At the hospital, the doctors gathered in the ICU, reviewing the environmental report carefully. Even the most experienced specialists had overlooked it because the symptoms were subtle, mimicking multiple medical conditions. No standard blood test could immediately detect the chemical imbalance. The case had become a puzzle, but now the missing piece had finally appeared. The billionaire stood silently outside the ICU room, staring through the glass wall at the machine supporting his wife's fragile body. His heart raced as he watched the medical team adjust the oxygen levels and initiate detoxifying treatments specifically for chemical inhalation. He could feel the tension slowly shift from despair to cautious hope. Angela had been allowed into the hospital waiting area near the ICU for the first time. The staff now treated her with respect, occasionally glancing toward her as if waiting for her to offer insight. She sat quietly, watching the scene unfold, feeling strangely nervous, though relieved. Her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. The first signs of change were subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone not paying close attention. A rise in oxygen saturation by a single percentage point, slightly more consistent breathing, the tiniest twitch of her fingers, a flicker of recognition in her eyelids. The medical team monitored these changes like hawks, knowing that each tiny improvement could mean the difference between life and death. They adjusted her treatment slowly, carefully, avoiding any sudden changes that might shock her fragile system. It was a delicate balance, a dance between medical precision and patience. Hours passed, but every small improvement fueled hope. The billionaire barely blinked, refusing to leave her side. He held her hand gently, whispering stories of their life together, recalling moments that had once seemed ordinary, but now felt like treasures. Angela quietly observed, her mind replaying everything she had noticed in the mansion. Every detail now felt validated, every instinct she had trusted had been correct. She remembered the faint dizziness she had felt while cleaning, the stronger scent at night, the heat trapped in the closed room. All of it had led to this moment, when knowledge born from observation, rather than formal training, saved a life. By late afternoon, her vital signs began showing more definitive improvement. Doctors gathered around the monitors, exchanging looks of cautious optimism. One senior physician, who had been skeptical at first, allowed himself a rare smile. "It's working," he said softly, almost in disbelief. The billionaire finally exhaled audibly, feeling a burden lift from his chest. He had faced countless crises in his business life, but nothing had shaken him like this. Nothing had tested his patience, his hope, and his humility in this way, until now. Angela noticed something else, a subtle change in his expression, one that she had never seen before, a mixture of gratitude, respect, and awe directed not at doctors, but at her, a quiet maid who had seen what everyone else had missed. Later, the attending physician called Angela over privately. He explained how crucial her observation had been in identifying the environmental cause. Without her, they might have continued focusing only on internal medical causes, wasting valuable time. "You helped save her life," he said earnestly. Angela's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. "I just noticed something no one else did," she said humbly. Meanwhile, the billionaire finally allowed himself to step back from the edge of despair. His wife's condition, though still critical, was stabilizing in ways no one had predicted days ago. Doctors explained that with continued treatment and careful monitoring, she could fully recover. The story of the collapse, the failed diagnosis, and the overlooked environmental hazard began to spread quietly among hospital staff, a tale of an elite household, a mysterious illness, and the small, unnoticed maid whose careful attention made all the difference. Angela remained silent about recognition. She did not seek reward or fame. Her only satisfaction came from knowing she had acted when it mattered most. As night fell and the hospital lights dimmed slightly, the billionaire's wife stirred more noticeably, her fingers flexing with intention, her eyes opening slowly. As she took her first conscious breath in days, the monitors beeped steadily, calmly. The billionaire squeezed Angela's hand gently, whispering, "You were right." And in that moment, Angela understood something profound. Sometimes the most powerful contributions come not from wealth, education, or status, but from seeing what others overlook, from noticing the tiny details that quietly shape life or death. The battle was far from over, but the tide had turned, the overlooked clue had been found, the hidden danger had been addressed, and the woman lying in the ICU bed was finally on the path back to life. It was a victory born from observation, courage, and the quiet determination of someone who refused to let small details go unnoticed. Sometimes, the smallest voice can make the loudest difference. The first rays of sunlight spilled through the hospital windows, cutting across the sterile room where the billionaire's wife lay, fragile but alive. For the first time in nearly a week, the atmosphere in the ICU was not tense with uncertainty, but filled with a cautious, hopeful energy. Machines continued to monitor her vital signs, but the beeps no longer carried the urgency of alarm. They were steady, rhythmic, reassuring. The billionaire, who had spent sleepless nights at her bedside, finally allowed himself to lean back in the chair beside her bed. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, now held a depth of vulnerability he had never experienced before. He looked at her pale but stable face and thought about how close he had come to losing her, how easily his life, his empire, and everything he had built could have seemed meaningless in the face of uncertainty. Angela, sitting quietly in the corner of the room, watched the scene unfold. She had been invited closer now, allowed to stay in the ICU waiting area with some of the hospital staff. No one treated her like a mere maid anymore. The doctors and nurses exchanged glances whenever she was near, aware that the observation she had made days ago had changed the course of the patient's treatment. It was small things that had made all the difference, details no one else had thought mattered, the faint dizziness she had noticed, the unusually strong scent in the master bedroom, the subtle ventilation problem that had gone unaddressed. No degree, no years of medical training, had revealed it. But Angela had noticed, and her quiet courage had given the doctors a clue they desperately needed. A nurse stepped forward to check the billionaire's wife's vitals. "Her oxygen levels are stable, and she's responding well to the adjusted treatment," she said softly. The billionaire's relief was almost audible. He exhaled deeply, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Then came the turning point. As the nurse gently brushed the woman's hand, she stirred, flexing her fingers intentionally. Her eyelids fluttered and opened, slow at first, but with focus. She looked around the room, recognition dawning in her eyes. The billionaire's hand tightened around hers, tears forming in his eyes as he whispered, "You're safe, you're back." Angela's heart raced. She had not expected this moment, had not allowed herself to hope, but seeing the response, seeing the first sign of life return, brought a surge of quiet satisfaction. She realized that this fragile revival, this step toward recovery, had been sparked by her observation. Her attention to detail, something she had once considered trivial in the face of wealth and power, had now literally saved a life. The billionaire finally turned his attention to Angela, his expression unreadable at first. Then he spoke, softly but firmly, "Angela, you noticed what everyone else missed. You saved her life." Angela lowered her eyes instinctively. Recognition and praise were unfamiliar to her. She had grown up in a world where speaking up meant risking your place, your safety, your reputation. And yet here she was, credited with something monumental. She shook her head slightly, saying simply, "I just saw something unusual. I thought it mattered." It was enough. For the billionaire, it was more than enough. He realized that his wealth, his power, and his influence could not replace awareness, attention, and courage. No one else had noticed the subtle environmental hazard, no one else had connected the small dots. Angela's quiet vigilance had made the difference between life and death. Outside the ICU, word began to spread. Hospital staff shared the story cautiously, careful not to overstate it but unable to hide the truth. A young maid, a person overlooked by everyone, had been the one to provide the missing clue. Whispers circulated about her sharp observation, her courage, her willingness to speak up despite her lowly position. And slowly, respect replaced anonymity. Inside the room, the billionaire's wife was stabilizing further. Her breathing grew more regular, her color improved, and she began responding to gentle questions and soft encouragement. Each small reaction fueled hope, confirming that the solution had been correct. The environmental cause had been addressed, the treatment had been adjusted, and now, slowly, recovery was possible. Angela remained in her corner, quietly observing the moments of life returning to someone who had seemed lost forever. She didn't seek applause or acknowledgement. But even in silence, she felt the profound truth of what had happened, that sometimes, those who are overlooked, those who move quietly in the background, can wield the greatest power, not through money or education, but through attention, care, and the courage to act when no one else does. The billionaire reached out and squeezed her hand gently, whispering again, "You changed everything." And in that quiet ICU room, amid the rhythmic beeps of the monitors and the soft whispers of nurses, the lesson became undeniable. Life is fragile, solutions are often hidden in plain sight, and heroes are not always the ones in white coats or suits, they are sometimes the ones who notice what everyone else misses. For the first time in days, the mansion's tragedy began to feel like a story of hope, of redemption, and of recognition, proof that even the quietest voices can make the loudest difference. The recovery was slow, but every passing hour brought hope. By the next morning, the billionaire's wife was sitting up slightly in her hospital bed, supported by nurses and a carefully adjusted oxygen supply. Her eyes, once dim and unresponsive, now scanned the room with clarity. Recognition flickered as she saw her husband kneeling beside her, holding her hand tightly, whispering words of encouragement and love. The billionaire felt tears sting his eyes as he realized the magnitude of what had almost been lost. He thought of the days he had spent powerless despite all his wealth, all his influence, and all his connections. He realized that life's most crucial victories often come from places no one expects. Angela stood quietly at the edge of the room, her hands folded in front of her, heart pounding as she watched the reunion. She had expected nothing, yet here was proof that her small observation had saved a life, something she had noticed while dusting a bookshelf and adjusting a curtain, something that others dismissed as trivial. The doctors, now confident in her recovery, explained the importance of the environmental discovery, how the fragrance system and faulty ventilation had created the invisible hazard, how early intervention had prevented irreversible damage, and how Angela's courage in speaking up had been the key to solving the mystery. The billionaire's expression softened as he turned to Angela, his voice steady but full of gratitude. "You saw what no one else could see. You saved her life. You have our eternal gratitude." Angela felt her throat tighten, words failed her, but a small, humble nod was enough. She had never wanted recognition, only to do what was right, but in that moment, she understood that noticing, speaking up, and trusting her instincts could change lives. Word of the recovery spread quietly but quickly through the mansion and hospital staff. The story of the overlooked maid who noticed the details that everyone else had missed became a quiet legend among the team, proof that heroism does not always wear a white coat or carry a title. In the following days, the billionaire's wife regained strength, her laughter slowly returning to the mansion's hallways. The household began to feel alive again, but with a subtle shift. Respect for the staff, especially Angela, became apparent. Conversations were no longer whispered in fear, but shared with acknowledgement of the quiet strength among them. The billionaire, once focused only on power and wealth, now saw value in humility, observation, and awareness. He ensured that Angela was recognized in ways she had never expected, offering her not just thanks, but a position of trust and responsibility within the household, acknowledging that sometimes, the most important contributions come from those whose voices are often overlooked. Angela remained humble, accepting her new role quietly, but inside, a sense of pride and fulfillment blossomed. She had acted when it mattered most, she had noticed what others missed, and she had changed the course of a life. As the mansion returned to its routine, there was a new sense of perspective, a lesson that money and status could not replace attention, courage, and heart. The billionaire's family had learned, in the most personal and terrifying way, that power without awareness could be meaningless. And Angela, the quiet maid who had once been invisible, had become the unexpected hero, her small voice proving that sometimes, the most overlooked people hold the power to change everything. Life continued, but the story lingered in everyone's mind, a reminder that observation, courage, and humanity are often stronger than wealth, stronger than titles, stronger than every expectation. And sometimes, the smallest person in the room is the one who sees what everyone else misses, saving not just a life, but the hearts of those who thought they were invincible.